the process of loading some of that cargo on board. The Cygnus is not designed to survive re-entry, so once it departs the International Space Station, it will be loaded up with trash and other unnecessary items from the ISS, decoupled from the space station and sent back into the atmosphere where it will burn up. It'll take roughly 2 days following this moment you're seeing here from a previous Cygnus launch for the Cygnus to reach the International Space Station, where it will be captured by the Canadarm you see here on your screen, and then docked with the ISS, or berthed to the station. And as you're just talking about, once it's ready to depart, it'll be loaded with any unnecessary items that the space station no longer needs. It also serves the function of boosting the space station, as you can see here in this image captured during one of its burns. This is a time lapse of releasing the Cygnus from a prior mission. And as you mentioned, it burns up as it comes back through the atmosphere. Currently T-minus 8 minutes, 22 seconds and counting. SpaceX commentator says for now they remaining go for launch. We are just about a minute away from the chill down of the 9 Merlin 1D engines. Taking a look at our live chat, I want to thank the more than 6,800 of you who are watching with us live this morning. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button. Allow some more folks to find their way into our live coverage. Certainly appreciate it. Also want to thank a couple folks for supporting our live launch coverage directly. Thanks to Tim Martin with a $4 super chat saying my son and I are watch newbies. Really appreciate you being with us for your first launch. Hope you enjoy the broadcast. Mike Dewar marking 8 months as a channel member at the pad leader level. Appreciate you sticking with us, Mike. Who says good morning, Clisty Lee, Mark Otto, Will, and everyone else here. Greetings from Titusville. One of the benefits of living here on the Space Coast is there are a number of spots from which you can watch rocket launch, all with varying views of good accessibility, obviously, assuming that the weather is cooperative wherever you are. Chat as well. And finally, for now, I'll second the $5 super chat from Mel Roberts Harold, one of our wonderful channel members, saying, hit like, y'all. Certainly be appreciated. We're now T-minus 6 minutes, 35 seconds and counting. Engine chill down now in progress. SpaceX launch commentator notes that they are working, quote, no significant issues. We recall that stage 1 RP1 load has been completed. Weather remains green for launch. Hear the call that we are preparing for a strong back retract here. See those clamp arms opening up underneath the payload fairings, and then the transporter erector, or the strong back, will pull back about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. Strong back retract currently underway here at the pad, Space Launch Complex 40. Now just over 3 minutes away from the planned liftoff. Coming up on first stage liquid oxygen loading being complete. We have not heard any more about the so-called spacecraft leak issue, but as we did hear from a SpaceX commentator just minutes ago, they were, quote, working no significant issues. So by all accounts at this point in time, call out for stage 1 LOX load being complete. We are proceeding to the final roughly 2.5 minutes before the liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. Again, this is an instantaneous launch window. So SpaceX, NASA, Northrop Grumman aiming for that 11:02 a.m. Eastern, 15:02 UTC liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket. Of course, because SpaceX has already started fueling, even if they had a larger window, they would be locked into their current T0 once fueling has begun, regardless. If for whatever reason in the next 2 minutes an issue crops up, the next launch opportunity for SpaceX and this mission will be on Tuesday, August 6th at 10:18 a.m. Eastern. Now less than 2 minutes to the planned launch. We did just hear the call for stage 2 LOX load wrapping up. Falcon 9 now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. Cygnus spacecraft also on internal power now. It will separate from the Falcon 9 upper stage a little more than 14.5 minutes after liftoff. Falcon 9 about to come into startup about 5 seconds from now. Do you hear that call? In about 5 more seconds, we're anticipating the SpaceX launch director to give their go for launch call. And we are go for launch per the SpaceX launch director. The range is clear for launch. We are now just 30 seconds away from the liftoff of the NG21 mission. $20 seconds. 15 seconds. And here we go. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket and the NG21 mission heading up to the International Space Station. The Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. Because the booster is returning to landing zone 1, there are going to be 5 events happening fairly quickly, one to another. First stage management cutoff is about T plus 2 minutes and 18 seconds, followed 4 seconds later by stage separation. The second stage engine will begin its burn about 2.5 minutes into flight. The boost back burn will start 5 seconds later, and then the payload fairings will be deployed just before the 3-minute mark. The boost back burn will conclude about 3 minutes 24 seconds into flight. Hear the call that the Falcon 9 following a nominal trajectory so far.
Stage separation confirmed.
And back ignition.
Stage 1 boost back startup.
And all good call-outs from SpaceX as you were hearing on your screen.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And there we heard
Call out for fairing separation as well. While we didn't see it, you can actually see the fairings falling away now on the right-hand side of your screen. You can see the Merlin vacuum engine flying the shorter nozzle configuration. When the Falcon 9's second stage doesn't quite need as much oomph, they're able to use this shorter nozzle configuration of the Merlin vacuum engine, which is a more cost-effective and cheaper iteration of this engine. You can see the hypersonic grid fins now being deployed on the Falcon 9's first stage. The boost back burn has concluded. There will be a couple more burns of the Falcon 9 first stage as it makes its way back towards Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, now more than 4 minutes into flight. Those puffs that you're seeing in between the hypersonic grid fins, those are the cold gas thrusters helping to adjust the attitude of the vehicle. You can see the altitude of the first stage booster is also decreasing, so we've passed its apogee. Speed still increasing, but that will, of course, slow down dramatically once the first stage entry burn begins. You can see actually looking at the upper stage engine just to its left, well, now beneath it in this angle, you can see what appears to be Tropical Storm Debbie actually making its way towards Florida. If what I'm seeing is what I believe we're seeing from this angle. That storm, of course, set to make landfall as a hurricane at the Big Bend section of the Sunshine State. Now more than 5.5 minutes into flight, the start of the first stage entry burn is coming up at T plus 6 minutes and 17 seconds. Coming up on the call for the first stage entry burn beginning.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
Here you heard that call. Our ground team tracking that entry burn coming in. Brent P. Carson's with Max Q Productions, first to get an eye on it. That burn now concluded. You can see that booster making its way back down towards landing zone 1. This booster coming in for its 10th landing to date, having most recently flown on June 20th of this year. Start of that landing burn. Landing legs have deployed, and a good landing of the Falcon 9 first stage at LZ1. And with the clouds hanging around, a spectacular sonic boom to cap it off. This mission marked the 335th landing of a first stage booster. This was also the 42nd landing at LZ1 and the 53rd booster landing here in the state of Florida. Now, because this is a fairly short mission and one where NASA is the customer, along with Northrop Grumman, of course, we will continue having onboard views until spacecraft separation. So stick right here as we continue to track the progress of the Falcon 9 second stage. We look for the departure of the Cygnus spacecraft. Do your call out for nominal orbital insertion. We're now 9 minutes and some change into flight. The Cygnus spacecraft will be deployed at T plus 14 minutes, 35 seconds. Got some views of the Cygnus spacecraft now live from the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. Again, deployment of the spacecraft will happen at T plus 14 minutes, 35 seconds, give or take a few seconds. That will begin the Cygnus solo flight that will last roughly 2 days as it makes its journey up to the orbiting outpost, getting ready to be received by NASA astronauts Matt Dominic and Jeanette Epps. On board the Cygnus spacecraft are about 8,200 pounds of cargo and supplies heading up to the Expedition 71 astronauts. Taking a live look at the pad there on the right-hand side of your screen, of course. Fortunately, devoid of a rocket. We went from a 10% chance of good weather for launch today, increased to 40, and that 40 was good enough to thread the needle, and the Cygnus is very soon to be on its way by itself heading up to the ISS. As we continue to track the progress of the Falcon 9 upper stage, I want to thank a couple folks for their support this late morning now. Thanks to Kevin Johnson for a $2 super chat. Thank you, Kevin. Greg Jazz Jr. with a $2 super chat as well, saying go SpaceX go. And $5 super chat and some hippo applause from SG. Thank you, SG. This particular Cygnus spacecraft, as is the case with its predecessors, is named for an explorer who is no longer with us. This particular first Cygnus spacecraft, I should say, named the SS Richard Dick Scobie, the pilot of STS-41C and, of course, the commander of STS-51L, among those who unfortunately perished during the Challenger disaster on January 28, 1986. And so the spacecraft named in his honor. We are now just about 2 minutes away from the deployment of the Cygnus spacecraft. We're now T plus 13 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. Less than a minute away from the deployment of the Cygnus spacecraft from the Falcon 9 upper stage. Now about 10 seconds away from spacecraft deployment.
Should be hearing that call.
Cygnus deploy confirmed.
And with that, Cygnus is flying free, beginning a roughly 2-day journey to the International Space Station. It has about 40 hours of transit time. And again, NASA astronauts Matt Dominic and Jeanette Epps will be monitoring its journey and will be ready to capture and berth the spacecraft once it arrives at the space station. In roughly 2 hours and 15 minutes, the solar arrays on the Cygnus spacecraft will be deployed. That process, once it begins, will take a little more than 40 minutes. And that will help power the spacecraft as it makes its journey to the ISS. Going to listen into Bill Spetch talk for a moment about this mission.
Back on the previous 20 Cygnus vehicle launches to see just how much capability has been added to the vehicle to support the ISS mission. I had the privilege to be at the first commercial resupply services launch for Cygnus to ISS, and it is awesome seeing where we are today with this launch. I'm really excited that the weather cooperated with us to get this mission underway.
Bill, we're glad the weather cooperated too. If you would please outline for us the upcoming activities for the crew on board the station as they prepare for Cygnus's arrival early Tuesday.
So we get most of the items in place and checked out before we launch as part of our launch commit criteria. The crew has already done some practice runs on board for grappling Cygnus when it arrives. Closer to the arrival, they will set up to monitor its approach to the capture point before ultimately grappling the spacecraft with the robotic arm.
And Bill, anytime a visiting vehicle arrives at the station, there's a choreography to unload the spacecraft. How complex is that process, and what factors contribute to it?
It does take a lot of planning and choreography to unload Cygnus. The team on the ground looks at a number of factors when addressing how the vehicle will be unloaded. First and foremost is we want to get going on all the time-critical science experiments that arrive on the vehicle. Those will be uploaded first to allow the crew to start conducting those experiments. The team must also take into account the available storage on board the ISS. This mission is delivering over 8,000 pounds of science, supplies, and hardware that takes up a lot of space. The team will stage what is retrieved from Cygnus in order to balance that with the available space inside the ISS. And finally, some of the hardware arriving will be installed on the ISS at planned times later during the mission. The teams account for all of these factors when planning how and when to unload the spacecraft.
All right, Bill Spetch, the Operations Integration Manager for the International Space Station Program. Thanks for joining us today.
And with the successful deployment of the Cygnus spacecraft, a good first stage booster landing back at LZ1, we're going to go ahead and begin to wind down our live coverage by taking a look back now at the mission stats as they currently stand. This was the 10th flight of Falcon 9 booster 1080, the 360th Falcon 9 launch to date. This was the 75th Falcon 9 flight of 2024, the 304th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was SpaceX's 76th orbital launch of 2024, if you include the Falcon Heavy launch, including on top of the 75 Falcon 9s. This was the 118th orbital launch for SpaceX within the last 365 days. The 198th orbital launch from Pad 40, their workhorse site. And this marked the 253rd overall orbital launch from this pad as well. Taking a look at the bar chart here, this is where SpaceX stacks up now as we continue to roll on in the month of August. Moving on to some recovery stats. With that booster landing at LZ1, that was the 42nd time we've seen that operation there. It's the 53rd SpaceX landing here in the Sunshine State, the 72nd overall land landing, and the 335th overall SpaceX booster landing as well. Finally, some industry stats. This marked the 54th orbital launch from Florida this year, the 81st from U.S. soil, This was the 90th orbital launch from U.S. rocket company and the 143rd orbital launch from around the world. Looking ahead to the future here, we are keeping our eyes on another SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket launch